Alright. This is the new Overworld. Let me make some notes here real quick. That's nice. I don't want to do that, Windows. You can do something else. Alright. This has taken about 8 weeks to get. 8 weeks. All this done. So I'll just go over some stuff real quick about what this is. This is the overworld for the Shadow King, and this the world's going to be broken up in islands. The center island, and you have islands around that. Bosses are denoted by skulls, so you can see that there are 6 bosses around a primary boss. And this guy looks a little bit different because he's the Shadow King. He's the Shadow King. Okay. So, these red circles are locations. I'm sorry, these red circles are levels. And then these yellow circles are locations. And then Link, the way that this map works, Link will travel between locations. And then if you press A on a level, it'll enter that level, just like the way the game works now, but it's a bit more spread out and complicated, a bit more involved, so, which is good. And then Colosseums are still in the game from the previous version, but each section of islands has its own Colosseum, which is this circular round thing with some kind of entrance, is basically all it takes to describe a Colosseum. So, for example, you have a underwater Colosseum here in the forest area, forest island, instead of like a forest Colosseum, because I think that would just be boring. So, an underwater one would probably be cooler. You have a Colosseum here in the Thieves' Hideout, which is actually it looks like it's accessed through here, but there's going to be a gate, kind of blocks that off, and instead it will be accessible through this side entrance right here. If you zoom in real close, you can see there's a location right here, and then we would climb up, enter this level, and then go through that cave, which would be part of the level, and we'd probably come out like right here inside of the town. So that's like a secret entrance into the thieves area. And then I think once certain things have been done, ignore this gold right here, I'm still working on it. I think once certain things have been done, like in the castle, because there's an entrance here, and then an entrance here to the main castle, which is going to be this area with the Colosseum on top. Once you've beaten the castle, then the gate will open, and you'll be able to access the gate just like normal. I think that there will probably be another secret entrance on this side as well, so that you can kind of come through and you'll pop out like right here or something. There's a lot here, but anyway, that's the Colosseum right there. And then you get over to Death Mountain. Death Mountain is going to be great. I'm really excited about it. There's 2 entrances. There's one on land, which obviously won't take you completely all the way up, and then there's the main entrance from water that you're going to have to climb up this wall and into this cave to do. And the mechanics for this are already in the game, so this is not even, I don't even need to really do anything to actually make this work, except go into the editor and build it. In the back, we have a temple that is hidden, kind of, and you can just barely see the top of the light touching it. And it has that square shape, and I'll explain a little bit more about that now. There's these temples on the forest island, and then there's a temple over here that's sand, and then there's a temple that is cloudy. I don't think we have a lava temple, something we kind of left out. I might hide it back here. Yeah, and then we have this mountain temple. So we have a few temples kind of spread out around that you'll need to complete for something. Death Mountain is over here, but its Coliseum is right here. And Death Mountain's Coliseum, because I'm still going over Coliseums, is going to have a climbing mechanic built into it. So you're going to have to climb up this wall fighting these mini bosses and bosses for money. Thieves' Den, I don't know if this is necessarily going to have an interesting or unique mechanic to it. It's just going to have different mini bosses and bosses, and I think that the main boss after this dungeon is beaten is going to be part of the Coliseum. So you'll have to beat several tiers of bosses until you work your way up to the big guy, you know. Death Mountain, I haven't really completely planned this all out totally. I just know that there's a lot of stuff over here and it's all gonna fit together eventually. There's also these castles. I know that I'm still talking about Coliseums. I'll come back to the castles then. This is the swamp kind of island, but actually it's more tentacle based now, which is going to be like an anaconda kind of boss with anaconda enemies that support it and everything in this weird green slime. So to the left we have this haunted like mental asylum, right, with an entrance down here. Then you got to go through a graveyard. I'll go a little bit closer. You got to get through a graveyard into this mental institution that has like 4 stories to it. And I think that once you beat this, it will unlock the main dungeon here. So this is like number 1 you got to beat. Then you can do the number 2 main thing. And then over here we have the Coliseum. The Coliseum uses the slime idea, and the slime mechanic for this is just going to slow the player down. And I think just by slowing the player down enough with slime that's on the ground, that'll kind of change. It'll force the player to play differently and kind of change how they play, I think more defensively and more ranged or something like that. So unique enemies are going to be here that are designed to function in slime. And I really like the tentacles. Like the tentacles that come up here. These big tentacles then became smaller tentacles. It's just a repeating visual motif. These are fun. They kind of wrap around the Coliseum and give it a little bit of depth. And these help to sell just the size of this weird enemy. It's like you're going to have to fight eventually. It's just huge. It's massive. But I'm not exactly sure what it is because it's not the Kraken. The Kraken's too small and simple. I'll have to make a new boss just because this idea is so cool. The lighthouse. I'm not going to talk about the lighthouse. I'll just let people discover that. This is a cloud area. So the cloud Coliseum's up here. And the way that cloud mechanics work, when you go up into the sky, you're going to be standing on clouds. And then there's going to be the world below you. And in the game there's already pits. So if you fall into a pit, it would just respawn you at the last door you went through. But if you fall through the clouds, it's going to take you to the level below you. So for example, you'll see that most of these guys have levels below. Like if you fall here, you would land there. See? So holes in clouds are like pits that will take you to another level, and that's how clouds are going to function here. So we have a Coliseum in the sky where you're going to have to fight bosses and mini bosses on clouds, and if you fall, then you automatically lose the battle and you land back here in the water, which is shameful, and you will feel shame. Okay, so here's the cloud dungeon. You'll have to go here to this location, and then you'll have to have a basic understanding of the farming mechanic that's already built into the game, where you'll have to plant a seed right here on this level, or this level, and then you'll have to get water from a nearby location and get it to grow, and it has to be like a magic seed, and that magic seed will then grow a beanstalk that goes up into the skull and give you access to the dungeon. It's not a hard thing to do, and I think that I think the player's going to have an infinite amount of seeds, so they're not going to have to go like purchase seeds to get access to the dungeon. They'll just have like a bag of magic beans or something that they can plant, but that'll be the way to get up into that dungeon because there is no other way. And then once you're inside of that dungeon, it'll be a multi-tiered, like, level dungeon, and then with the same cloud mechanics as over here. So if you fall, you'll be falling back to the level where you started, and you'll have to replant that seed and then climb up the beanstalk and start all over. So it's not really like... It'll be a difficult dungeon in the sense that your progress will be reset pretty often at first. Castle in the Sky. I haven't really decided exactly what that is. It's a supporting role to this dungeon. I know for sure, just like this mental institution is a supporting role to that dungeon. You'll have to beat this in order to unlock that. I don't know if you'll have to beat this in order to unlock this, because the growing mechanic is what unlocks it. But this is not going to be accessible unless you go through this smaller 3-tiered dungeon. So it'll be like, this is the first level, and then you'll go to another level, then another level, and then another level, and then it'll spit you out here. And then you'll have access to the castle, which maybe that this has like the best items or something. I don't know. The lava section. So yeah, I didn't really talk about the mechanics for the lava in the lava coliseum, but lava is essentially like a conveyor belt. It goes in one direction. There's some differences though. It pushes things in one direction. Lava will set things on fire and destroy objects and actors. Conveyor belts won't destroy them and won't set them on fire. It won't deal them damage. And conveyor belts can also be turned on and off via the switch. You just have to walk up to it and hit it, and then it'll go over there, and then, you know, all... And then, there we go. And then, sorry, my headphones turned off. Once you hit that and it turns all the conveyor belts off, they won't move or anything, but lava will be constantly flowing. So in this Coliseum dungeon, I think that the lava is going to be flowing like counterclockwise constantly, and then you're going to have essentially what are rafts made out of stone, because if you put wood into lava, it would burn. So you're going to have chunks of rock that you're going to have to stand on, and then that's going to move you around the Coliseum as you're fighting a mini-boss or a boss for money. So that's the idea behind this. Now, the Coliseum right here in the Forest Island would be extremely boring and basically a duplicate of this, because this is a Coliseum on land. This is like introductory Coliseum, the easiest place to make money, because it's where you start out, kind of. But this is also the final dungeon, so it's like the easiest place and the hardest place right next to each other, with all the NPCs right here. So this is kind of like a nice little hub, an introduction and ending and everything you need. But this Coliseum is on land, and it is basically the Forest Coliseum. So if I put a Forest Coliseum here, it would make absolutely no sense, and it would just be a duplicate of that. So this is underwater. The mechanics of this is essentially lily pads. You have water that puts the player into a swimming state, just like the game is right now, and then you're going to have lily pads that the player can stand on and attack enemies from, you know? And that's pretty much it. And that's a big reason why all of this detail of like all these marshes and stuff is around there. Because I'm trying to sell the player the visual idea, like, hey, there's going to be some stuff on the water really low to the ground that creates these coastline colors, right? These coastline colors. So that's basically what lily pads are going to be in the water. So those are all the Colosseums for the game. I need water really bad. Alright. What's next? I'm going to talk about NPCs. All the NPCs are mostly going to be here in this port town, right next to the Shadow King. There will be a few other locations, like there'll be some people here that you can talk to, some people here that you can talk to, and here. But I think that's pretty much it. This house is either abandoned or destroyed, and will be a place where Link can take objects and drop them and possibly modify this house to kind of be his own. But it won't be a place where NPCs exist. There's these castles. You'll have to like find all the castles and beat them for something, I don't know. Except these castles. These castles have skulls on them, so I'm trying to visually communicate that they're part of this dungeon, and these are just different entrances. So you have 1 entrance, 2 entrance, and 3 entrance to the same dungeon, essentially right here. You have these plateaus. These plateaus, I think I'm going to have like short dungeons just with puzzles without any enemies that lead up to like an old man that gives you an item or a tip to kind of throw back to the original Zelda. But I want to put a few rooms of challenge before it, just so that the player isn't bored and just, you know, going into these rooms, talking to someone and then leaving, because that to me seems like a waste of a level. You know, I want to challenge the player on every level. I want every level to be interesting and fun in its own way and rewarding. So I think that's what these plateaus are going to be about. So there was another plateau over here, but I haven't really been able to get like a way to get over to it yet. So I might just take this and cut it and put it somewhere else and use it. We'll talk about sunken ships here in a little bit. I think this is going to be a plateau. Possibly. I know that there's going to be a hidden entrance here, and this is going to function like a red circle, like a location or a level. And this is not going to be a location. It's going to be a level, but it's going to look like a location, so it's going to be sneaky like that. There's another sunken ship. So we have a lava sunken ship, and then another lava sunken ship that isn't necessarily like all red. It's more white. So just different themes. Sunken ship over there. I think the ships are going to be used to improve the boat that Link is traveling on. And then the castles, I'm not exactly sure. I think the castles will probably give Link like an item or something. So I'm taking away the idea of dungeons rewarding items, or opening up like a big chest in a dungeon to get the dungeon's item that then is used later on in the dungeon to complete it. I'm kind of doing this backwards. So like, just for example, like let's say you needed the hook shot to get into the forest dungeon. I wouldn't put the hook shot in the forest dungeon. I would put the hook shot in the castle right here, and then build a mini dungeon leading up to the hook shot. And then in the first or second room here, I would create a puzzle that forces the player to use the hook shot, so they knew, hey, you need the hook shot. So that way I have a dungeon over here and a dungeon right here. So I've kind of just gotten more mileage out of that idea. But this will be a shorter dungeon, and it'll be procedurally generated and still be interesting. But this will be a longer dungeon, the forest dungeon, leading up to a boss, or completion of the dungeon, which then leads up to another level where the boss is. I don't know. It's either idea. So maybe the castles give you like items or something. I'm not exactly sure what the temples will do then. Maybe they increase your magic or your health or something. Completion of them, kind of like shrines in Breath of the Wild. I don't know. There's a lot of different directions to go with that. But they're all kind of in the game and ready to go. So I am happy about where this is and what's about to happen. So yeah, we have Death Mountain castles and Death Mountain boats over here. Here's a very unique location or level, and that's going to be the tent. I'm not exactly sure what's going to go in that tent, but it's something's going to go there, and it's going to be fun. Skull on top of a mountain. I think that this guy's going to give you like information about your playthrough, you know, like how many times you've died and what your luck is, because that's going to be a throwback to Link to the Past. And then we have another ship over here, kind of hidden in the tentacles. But I think once you get all the ship upgrades, the boat will be really powerful. It might even have a cannon, because I was thinking about a really fun battle where you fight Ganon on a ship, and he uses the Ganon cannon. Anyway, moving on. There's some fun stuff that's going to happen down here. I think this is going to be like a playground area, because we have these multi-level little islands, and we also have this. I have no idea what this is. It's some kind of pit that goes into the water, and I don't know where it goes. Maybe this is the optional underwater dungeon, and you just don't ever have to do that because it's just terrifying and a nightmare. That's probably what it is. So there's the secret entrance, and then there's the terrifying underwater dungeon that you don't have to do, but exists because, hey, I can make that happen. And then I think this is just going to be the playground where you can use a hook shot to like jump from island to island and do all kinds of fun stuff. And I also think that later on I'm going to build a path over here and then have like a way up so that you can like climb up these and then go across this bridge and have all kinds of fun stuff to do like over here. This is just like a playground area. I mean, this whole game is kind of going to be a big sandbox like playground to just see how far I can take Zelda. But it's also got to have, you know, objectives, and I think the objectives that I've made so far are interesting and fun. One more thing I'm going to talk about before I go into the development of this is the island's visual themes. So you're going to start out here, basically. And once you get a very short introduction to the game, you can go anywhere and do anything you want. True to Zelda 1 form. There's some prerequisites for entering dungeons. Like, you won't be able to enter this dungeon until you figure out that you can get through the secret entrance here. There might be some things that prevent you from entering like this dungeon. Like, you got to beat this first, and then in order to get in there you might have to have some item or something that you could get from like that castle. But everything will be open. I'm not going to block players off. Like, you'll be able to do anything in any order you want to, and the design of the game will accommodate for that. So anyway, back to the visual themes. The visual themes are skulls for this first island, and it's just going to be, you know, basically a circle with some teeth, and then you put some eyes in there and a nose, and you're good. And you see there's just skulls everywhere, and these skulls then touch the other themes that each section of island has. So this has a lot of marsh in it and a lot of trees, so we see skulls touching and interacting with marsh, like actually falling into the marsh right there. If you can see that, there's skulls sinking into the marsh, quite literally. And then over here we have like this multi-tiered approach where we have a lot of different levels. Like, we have this higher level here, and then like a lower level that kind of branches off to it, and then off from it, and then like another smaller one that then leads down to my headphones keep turning off because they're shitty. Don't buy Astro A20s. Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway, there's like level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So we see that that's the theme for this island. So that theme is then interacted with visually by the skulls here. So we see like skulls sitting on top of that, whatever. Skulls don't quite interact with the mountains yet. I need to kind of get on that. That's an upgrade I need to do. There's going to be some skulls interacting with a mountain here, probably like around here, just to kind of carry that theme on. Skulls are interacting with slime, because the general theme here is slime. And then we have skulls interacting with clouds here, and I even took it as far as making a cloud skull. So there we go. You even cast a little shadow. Alright. And then lava and skulls interacting with lava. So all the visual themes are complete. I think this is also a sunken ship, just of a different variety. I'm not exactly sure if that's my sprite or not, but I love it and I'm keeping it. Alright, so that is the development of the Overworld, and that's going to go into the game tomorrow. And the main objects will probably stay black and white for now until I start consolidating texture sheets, and then once that's done, everything will be color because the tropical theme has been decided. So now let's talk about the development of the Overworld. The Overworld started just from this one drawing. It was just a big skull with some islands around it, a ship, and locations that were connected. That's a better view of it. There we go. So that's a better view of the drawing. So then from that drawing, I was looking into Photoshop and started working on what was going to become the Shadow King's skull. I think this was inspired by another drawing or something. But there's the ship, and you can see the island kind of forming. And I really like this idea, actually. Like, this is a really cool idea, and I might come back and revisit this at some point because I love how the water cuts through here and how the water kind of comes out of his head. I think the hole in the head wasn't thematically appropriate because he's a Shadow King. So this is just someone shot in the head. Like, if I put a crown on this, then, you know, there's the king idea. But the shadow idea is not implemented thematically appropriately here. So really this is why I kind of moved away from this, but this idea sticks around for quite some time. So yeah, there's a little bit more development, got rid of the island, and now that's just kind of on its own. And you kind of see this, I'm trying to just work out the scale of like how big this skull needs to be in relation to Link based on the original ideas here. So kind of get a little bit further. Ooh, nasty, nasty. What, moire pattern? Okay, so it's grown a little bit. So the island is behind him now, and once you kind of separate the skull from the island, then it starts to make sense. So this is like the foundation of the idea. You can kind of see that the skull was part of the island. Now it's kind of on its own, but I kind of see that like it still needs that supporting, like almost like set of shoulders around it. You know, like that's what kind of gives it that familiar look. And I think that larger, almost like collar look, almost makes it look like a king too. Like you can put the collar up on a more like royal character or whatever, or a more fanciful like Victorian character. Anyway, that's dumb. Here's a plateau. Just kind of just playing around with different landmass ideas, trying to establish some visual ideas. Like I think this might have been the first appearance of a plateau, like a new kind of landmass in my own style. A lot of pictures of that plateau. Okay, so I'm trying to play around with tentacles. I had the Kraken idea already in the game, and here we see there's some tentacles on a coastline with some roughly drawn mountains. So that's like a location, an entrance. Those clouds are nasty right there. Oof. And this thing coming down, it's just so hard to do properly because you can't really convey depth on this landmass until you add stuff. Appearance of the first Colosseum. It's pretty rough. I think I based that on like a picture I pulled off Google and just pulled down some details to get a rough idea of it. And then there's the very first idea for the sunken ship, just kind of a ship that's upturned. Chains of islands up there as well. So that's just a straight rip from Chrono Trigger added into these islands, and I absolutely hated the way that these islands connected like that. But you kind of see that there's different land masses and they're being laid out. There's a small skull thrown into the woods. This didn't look good. the way that it was implemented. I might come back and use like small skulls for entrances. That would be pretty sweet. Wouldn't mind it. But they need to be big for now. And then, see my sweet setup here. This is getting a little bit more established. I'm trying to work out where the land masses are. I think this is before I had really figured out where the skulls were going to be. And then this is the first appearance of Death Mountain skull, which I think I was also kind of, well, no, this wasn't Death Mountain. This was it was like a water dungeon kind of thing. But it didn't work out because why is there a hole in his head? That looks interesting, but why? And there needs to be more decoration around the skull. So he got some mountains on his head. So I'm trying to at least make it thematically appropriate. Maybe give him some mountains, but then this is going to clash with actual Death Mountain because Death Mountain doesn't have like water flowing off the rocks and whatever. So, and this is the very first skull for Forest Dungeon. And then we have white, like ice island up there, which the more I thought about actually playing the game on ice, the more I hated the idea. So I just got rid of it completely. It's fine. Yeah, there's the whole ice island. I like this. This was cool. These were like some rocks here, but there was coastline breaking up the rocks. This is a really cool visual idea that only existed here, and I didn't reuse it again, and I would like to bring it back into the game, just because it's so visually different than everything else. Here I was hiding a skull with like two eyes, the nose, and then the coastline here. So it's like a very subtle skull, but it's also not done very well. So it's my fault. So here I added some trees like around the eyes to make the skull a little bit more apparent, and then I added some like slashed coastlines here, and that actually kind of looks like teeth. So it looks a little bit more like a skull, which I mean I'm working on the idea and making it better, but ultimately I'm just going to abandon it because it doesn't sell the idea of a skull like in your face, you know. Plateau Island grew a little bit and got some really interesting rock formations and coastlines. So I really liked the juxtaposition of the coastlines against the rocks over here, the dark and the light. That really helped to sell depth, and I began to understand that there's different like levels of altitude to this this overworld, this visual. So that's awesome. This is the very first lava island. It was just a tiny little horseshoe with this lava right there, and I was like, oh, wait a second, I can do a lot more with that. And then the very first incarnation of Death Mountain, which is interesting and very Indiana Jones-ish, because we have the mountains, and then we have this big face with like trees on top, mountains on the side, and it was going to be that you land here and then you go onto the coastline, you fight through like some jungles, and then you get to a big wall and you climb up a big wall into the nose of the skull. But when you actually think about this implementation, you'd need a location right here, you'd need a location right here, you'd need a location right here, and then you'd need a location like leading up into the nose, and that would require a sprite right here of a mountain so that Link could go behind the mountain so that it looked like he was actually inside of the island, and it became increasingly complex to actually implement that idea. Plus this kind of looks bad. I might revisit this later on. I mean, I like the general shape of the skull on the wall, but it's not implemented well enough. And you see that it's got a little bit more detail on the rocks, and I just took everything off of his head because I decided that the pointy mountains on his head was looking really stupid. This is a fun island. It starts off low and then gets really, really high over here. So it's like a like almost like a half pipe, you know. This got cleaned up a little bit. Okay, so then we started laying out locations here to kind of get an idea of how we're actually going to move around, and he got more detail in his teeth too. So a lot more detail in the water, more detail in the teeth. He's actually like rooted in the water now, kind of pointy. He looks a little intimidating. So then we have I swear to God, these headphones are terrible. Just automatically shut off after 10 minutes, even though I'm using them. That's interesting. So here we find the Skull Island being connected to the Forest Island, and kind of the very first idea. And this is so simple, and it reads very clearly, but it's boring. So you can understand why there's all that detail now in Skull Island, or Forest Island. And because it's very boring to just move throughout the sea without any kind of real detail there. So, moving on. Kind of see that we're going around it, kind of building the idea that we don't just have to move between two islands like left and right. We can actually go around the island, explore the overworld, because we're only going to be able to see like a section of the overworld at a time. Finally, we start applying this to the volcano idea, and this immediately looks so much better, and I just kept going with it. So we stacked this guy on top of this, and then we threw a couple of other volcanoes around him, and the base idea is there, and it just needs a lot of revisions. Lava flowing off the bottom of his teeth was awesome. Coming out of his eyes, I think, is a better choice though. So just little sections like that kind of shows you that just pieces of the overworld on its own still reads properly. Like you still get depth, you can still tell what's going on. So that was like kind of a snapshot test. Then we hit a really big milestone with Death Mountain. This is awesome. Alright, so we realized that mountains don't have to be like medium gray. They can be dark gray. They can be really, really, really dark gray actually. So here we're using 3 really dark grays to describe a pointy mountain. A very pointy, like dangerous, evil-ish mountain with coastlines down there. This is different than anything else in the game. So previous mountains look like this over here on the left. So then once we have this new visual motif on the right, we can do all kinds of awesome stuff with it. So, I mean, I literally split that island in half, just carving those mountains out, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is what it needs to be. So, the variation was there, and then you start playing around with the idea a little bit more. So this was the original implementation of Death Mountain. It was smaller in comparison to this main skull, and it just had a path that went back. There's a couple problems here. All of this is really, really good, and this established the foundation for what island biomes are, basically. There's a lot of problems. The main problem is this area right here, and all these curly things in the sea, and these pointy things. There's a pit there in the water, which there's no reason for that to be there. And there's also no reason for all these curly things to be there in the water. I don't even know what these are. So this was just some kind of visual thing that looked cool, and I ran with it, and then said, oh, this is not thematically appropriate, and then that became part of like Thief's Island later on, and also the Swamp Island later on. But you kind of see where this dark, pointy mountain theme helped to establish this repeating pattern, because this is a big one, and then you just take it and make the pattern smaller and smaller and smaller, and group it up and repeat it over and over and over and over again. Alright, and then I drew this skull in the water, and it was like, oh, this is awesome, and that has to be a dungeon entrance. And that's the foundation for the swamp that then became tentacles. And then kind of see where the overworld starts to come together. Not much has changed from this original setup here. Like this island worked when I first made it. I got rid of this boat on the left. But this island here and then these tentacles, it just kind of snapped into place, and it hasn't really changed since. You can see that all of the pathing here has changed though, and this was moved way further over here, all kinds of stuff. So a little bit clearer picture of that. And then we have the very first cloud implementation, which is skull surrounded by clouds, and it looks great. This is really far away, so I don't know how to actually get up there yet. So I'm still just throwing around like visual ideas. That skull was finally upgraded to actually look decent for the forest. So there's the previous skull. New skull, old skull. So I think it looks better, although I do miss their big rounded teeth down there. That was kind of fun. So this is where Death Mountain starts getting upgrades. Death Mountain I think is too small on the right, and I want it to be more imposing and interesting. So here we have the top part of a skull that I drew along with the jawbone. It has some teeth kind of sticking out of the bottom, and I want to turn this into a mountain. The main reason I like this more is because this is based on a photograph, and it actually has proper highlights for the scene, because the sun is in the upper left hand corner and it's shining down right. So here's the highlights from that sun. So it helps this skull actually fit into the scene better than this skull, which is just flatly lit, kind of like from the front. It makes no sense. So kind of a cleaner picture of what that it looks like, with the details in like the eyes and stuff. And then you'll see I'm starting to add depth to it. So I separated the jawbone down here into the water still with the teeth, kind of suggesting that there's teeth down here. And this is an entire object on its own with a building that kind of goes up through it, and then this point that goes through the skull, which I thought was really cool. Kind of going for the Mad Max look there, but it's still too small. Like, this is a very punk approach to it, but this needs to be bigger and more imposing. A little bit cleaner version of it. You see there's like some cracks up there in the skull that I threw in. And there's also details, shadows on the right that help to define like the building and the shape of the skull. And then this is the actual real kind of first themed dungeon that's properly done outside of Skull, the Shadow King dungeon, which actually isn't even properly done at this point. Death Mountain, once this was put together, was a pretty big thing, because it showed me that I could just stack mountains behind this and make this even bigger and more imposing, and that skulls could be kind of like the front decoration of a larger back set piece. So you see a little bit more detail is coming into the mountains behind, detail on the face. I'm kind of going for like a sugar skull look here, because I just like the way it looks, and this is my game and I can do whatever I want. This is the very first version of Thieves' Den. So this is an island. I hadn't done an enclosed island yet. Just a big circle with one entrance only that could be closed and opened. And then the multi-leveled approach, I think right here, is really what makes this so much more interesting. Because if I just had this, it would be cool. But this takes it to a whole nother level. So it's like two themes in one. It's enclosed with this crazy fence, but it also has like this multi-level approach to it. So, and then a little bit more work was done on the clouds to kind of define the shadows inside of them. You can kind of see a little bit of shadows right there inside the clouds, but then shadows on the ground, also creating depth, which I come to find out later on that this depth would be super, super, super important, because it helps to sell depth across the whole overworld map. For example, right here we see shadows, and then we see clouds, and we see them casting shadows, and like this shadow is further away from that cloud, so it's higher, and it creates this illusion of depth. And this is another idea that we play around with rocks in shadow. Like, this is probably one of my favorite examples right here, this rock. Half of it is in shadow with shadows, and the other half is not in shadow of the clouds, and that part of the rock has highlights, even though it's just 3 pixels. 3 little pixels right there of highlight, it still sells the idea. And I think that's really, really, really important. And the very first, this is where it came from. This is the very first implementation of it. This is where the shadows came into the overworld. So moving on. This gets cleaned up a little bit. We get plateaus back behind there because I'm trying to add more depth now. I understand how important depth is. Okay, so now we actually have kind of how the overworld is being laid out with the arrangement of skulls being kind of even, with the exception of Thieves' Den. Thieves' Den kind of goes up a little bit. And then here we added clouds to Death Mountain to kind of give it some more awesome pixel art, just because pixel art is awesome. So we modified this and got rid of the teeth. I mean, the teeth are still technically there if you see these 2 stalactites on the left and the right. And then we have lava kind of dripping out of the eyes and nose. It's not thick lava, so it doesn't read very well, and it's not selling the idea that that's lava. It just kind of looks like he's like been through a rainstorm or something. I don't know. And then still working out what this area is going to be. It didn't make much sense to have this big high cliff here. It should be more welcoming and low to the ground. Working on pathing through Thieves' Den. Okay, so here's a general idea of like how pathing was going to work at first, and a pretty good layout of the map as is. A lot has changed. Like this area down here is completely different. And there goes my headphones again. Alright, so this area is completely different. There's this bowl island. I don't think that this shows up anywhere else in the photos. But this was a really cool island. I completely scrapped the idea though because I couldn't make it work in any thematically appropriate format. So I might come back to that later on. Yeah, you can see the house down here, which gets moved. And then we start adding color. And wow, this hurts my eyes because this color is terrible. And the very first time I ever color anything, it looks terrible. So moving on. And this is starting to look better immediately, because we want this to be tropical and to be more yellow or orange color graded, for lack of a better term. And here we see that the waterfall becomes red, and then it gets this nice purple color when it interacts with the water. So there's a little bit of painterly color interaction going on. If that red hit that blue water in real life, it probably wouldn't look like that, depending on how thick it was. And then here's a better picture of it. We see that like we're starting to define the color in like the buildings a little bit better. And then we put the castles in the sky. This is a Chrono Trigger rip that I then modified very little. And then we kind of see the original idea for the Colosseum. This is where the Colosseum came from. There was like a gate down here that you had to enter, and then you had a location in here, and then you had to go under there, and then you had to go up into here, and there was like this lord's house with like this this one little tower over here, and it was going to be like a boss fight or something. And I was like, this doesn't make much sense. This looks interesting, and it sells the depth of the island well, but it's not thematically appropriate again. So a lot of ideas that I had, I kind of had to either modify or throw away because they weren't thematically appropriate. And then we see the connection of the castle to the cloud area. We see the mental institution kind of being built up, and yeah, this ship has been added here. Originally, Thieves' Den had tentacles coming out of the mouth, and it was going to be like a tentacle boss. We see a connection between this coastline area and the forest area and how they meet and interact. So we have swamp over here, coast over here, and no real overlap quite yet. And then we see color going on. And this is a really fun image to look at, because you have a finished volcano here. Then you have a volcano in tonal colors here. Like I think it's 4 or 5 tonal colors here. And then you have what are descriptions, just outlines, and basic tonal outlines for what volcanoes are, like on the left and right here. And you can see that I'm kind of building them like tree trunks, and then I'm just kind of pouring like some kind of liquid on top of that tree trunk mentally, and allowing that liquid to just kind of roll down and form around the trunks of the tree. And then that becomes the volcano. I mean, that's pretty much it. Here we see clouds casting shadows for the first time in color, I was really happy about that. And you can see things start getting very complicated. There's this 3-tier yin-yang thing going on right here that, again, thematically makes no sense whatsoever. Like, what is this? Why does it exist? The world may never know because I removed it. 5 colors on Death Mountain. We start to see that the details in the face come out, and it's looking good. I still think that this needs to be wider and larger, and I will enlarge it later on. The very first color for lava is applied and doesn't look good. The graveyard has finally been described tonally, and the tentacle over there is kind of separated away from it, and the mountain is kind of separated away from the tentacle. So all this is reading better. Like, this is separated on its own. The tentacle is a dark foreground object against a light background object. So I'm happy with that kind of separation. And here we see that Death Mountain is growing. Outline of the mountains. You can see that sometimes it takes multiple outlines to describe the object the way that I want, because I'm trying to build it in relation to the other objects around it. So there needs to be enough like padding, visual space around the object for it to exist comfortably in that context, if that makes any sense. Alright, and then lava has been improved because it needs to be a darker color. Lava is not normally that bright orange, whereas before. And then you can also see that I just accidentally made this right here. I was just like, hey, let's make a big open lava thing that has lava pouring out. And then I was like, hey, that kind of looks like a coliseum. And then I was like, oh, we can put coliseums everywhere. I can make a lava coliseum out of this, and I can put coliseums everywhere. So this was the beginning of coliseums for everyone, the Oprah of coliseums. Alright. And then you kind of see the color palette that I'm working with here. I have since got rid of that purple. I think these reds have been reduced a little bit because there isn't blood. We're just going with the lava now. And you still see that a lot of this is going to be moved around, and I haven't really committed to this pathing yet either. These are all just drawn paths, just so I can kind of develop paths in combination with objects and the decorations and details. So here, Death Mountain has finally got all the color it deserves, and it looks pretty good. The mountains need color, or the clouds need color. And then finally, we hit a home run with lava, and it looks decent. And if we use these 3 colors to describe it, we can do highlights and shadows with an appropriate color, and then we have lava pouring out of the eyes. And we still have the fangs down here, but they're just barely noticeable. And then this is finally getting described properly down there. I think we made lava a little bit. No, lava stayed the same. But we did break apart the color scheme a little bit to describe locations. So this red and this yellow aren't used anywhere else in the map except for locations and levels. And we're trying to consolidate this color palette because I don't want to use more than like 24 colors. I think I'm at like 21 right now. This gets a little bit more detail in the greens and in the skull. We've got some curls here and some details. Even though this is on the right side of the face, this all should be in shadow. I'm still using the highlight color to draw out all of these little curls and stuff to just add interest to the image. And then this got a tremendous amount of detail in the form of like curls and wraps all over the face, and then I quickly realized, oh, this doesn't look like a bone skull anymore. This looks like something very different but very awesome, and I'm not exactly sure where this is going. So eventually I took them, just made them completely black, added some opacity, reduced the transparency on them a little bit, modified their opacity, and it became shadow. So this bone skull, through the detail and creating a problem for myself, I realized, oh, this needs to be more thematically appropriate. It needs to become shadow. And this is where the Shadow King skull came from. Adding detail here to this skull inspired me to add ridiculous detail to the Shadow King skull and try and make it better. And I changed it so much it no longer looked like a bone skull, so then I had to make it into shadow. And that's where that idea came from. Here he still has bone for the teeth, because I wasn't sure if I could just put shadow into the water and that would be correct, or I didn't even really think about it. I thought from the bone he will like grow, and that doesn't really necessarily make sense. And I can just put it directly into shadow. You can still see that there's like details over here that I was working on too. So the old bone version, and this is like a detailed version of Thieves' Den, kind of where Link is kind of going through and we're figuring out how all of this is stacking up and looking and making sure that we have multiple levels here. You know, like this is the top of the gate, and then we're going to have platforms for the watchtowers, and we're going to have smaller platforms leading all the way down, so we're trying to sell as much depth as we possibly can. More zoomed out version, so we see how everything's really just kind of coming together now. I'm just adding color and details. So this is an actual defined version of the Lava Coliseum. And this is the Mountain Coliseum, Shadow King Coliseum, the Swamp Coliseum without the slime and any of the tentacles or details, the Water Coliseum, the Cloud Coliseum, and then a more zoomed out version of Thieves' Den as it gets developed. And you kind of see that these last few images kind of just show how it all kind of comes together. I'm working on pathing, and I'm like also doing details at the same time, so I can modify the path if I need to add details if the details need to be somewhere to make the image look good. You know, this is all about making everything look good. Like, it needs to be designed a certain way so that it's playable and fun, but it needs to look good because this is what you're going to be looking at a lot. And this is probably a very, very close version, just without clouds around it, of all of the islands and their various land masses and the way that they connect. And then there's the clouds, and then kind of like a little close-ups. So we added color here. I still think that this was like too bright, needed to be darker because it was right next to a bunch of dark objects. Here I discovered I could put little skulls directly into the water, so this became the visual motif for Skull Island, and that's what caused Skull Island to start just growing skulls everywhere. So then castles got added into Volcano, and we start seeing the cross-contamination of themes. And here, headphones turned off again. And here we see the cross-contamination of themes. We have castles, which is a separate theme, and then we are putting them into volcanoes. So we just smash castles into volcanoes. I should have done the same with temples. I should have done the same with like ships, but yeah, I can come back to that and do that later because I just need to wrap up these 8 weeks and then get back into developing the game because scope creep is ongoing. It doesn't end. Yeah, here we have castles like Mountain Castle, Marsh Castle with clouds and shadows. Thieves' Den starts to get rendered completely, like with coastlines and more of the houses being added. Lava's looking really good. That ship looks terrible. It just stands out way too much. It'll become darker and red. And then we started expanding the skulls to be part of other themes, to touch other themes. Here this got full color. This got a bunch of pointy things removed and slime was added, like around the tentacles and stuff. And that's really where the slime idea came from. The slime mechanic in the game was not, it doesn't exist right now. I know how to make it, and it will be trivial to do, and it's really coming from this visual style. Like, that slime mechanic wouldn't be in the game unless, if this island didn't exist, in other words. So because I drew this slime in this one image and was like, oh, that looks cool, yeah, slime's going to be in the game now. So that's where that came from. Yeah, skulls just keep expanding out. This is kind of showing the rendering of cloud shadows. Like, you kind of have to draw the objects separately and then add the details in. I was doing the details and projecting the cloud shadows at the same time, which kind of hurt the brain. So I would just do the objects and then the shadows and the details all separately. It's probably faster that way too. These skulls kind of grow up into these slime in this image. Right now we're still using the pointy mountains from the biome to the right, and we really need to be using the tentacles, which will happen soon. And here we're just, this is a good example of how themes are crossing. So we have lava up here touching marshland. So these two biomes are crossing and touching each other right here. But then there's also all of these rocks that are just kind of generally part of this biome as well, that are also crossed here with the marshlands. But over here you'll see that, like, there isn't any marshlands because they're all part of this area, this section, this island, this biome. So there's some crossover, and that blending, that visual blending of themes is very important, I think. So then we have the slime. Slime has grown a lot more. We still have the pointy islands here, and we're about to switch over to tentacles because that's that should be the theme of this area. Here you can see that I'm hiding a G in the lava right there. I'm signing this artwork just by hiding my initials in there. More development on Thieves Island. I really like the tilt shift effect here. It makes everything feel small and toy-like, so that's fun. But you can see, like, the castle over here gets these vines hanging down. The fence motif is repeated. We have a big fence on the outside, a small fence inside there. Finally, we have tentacles on the swamp island, and we have one tentacle wrapping around the Colosseum and dripping all kinds of nasty green slime off of it. And you can see that there's still, like, a space here, you know, hover handing the Colosseum with the tentacle. This tentacle gets pushed to the left and connects to the Colosseum. Just tons and tons and tons of details, because it has to match the detail density of the rest of the map. So I had to figure out a way to make these tentacles very small and persistent, like, everywhere. And then back to the original picture. And then, so that's really the last one that I did, last picture that I posted of the overworld. And now the overworld just sits in its current state, which I'm very happy with. Very, very happy with. So I'm going to gather up all the notes that I have for the development that's going to happen next. I have all of the islands kind of planned out and designed already, so I just need to go through and implement them. And all of the core systems for the game already exist. And everything's kind of set up. Like, the bowling pins are set up, and I just need to start knocking them down one by one now. I don't think it's going to be that difficult to complete the game the way that I want it to be done. I estimate that it will probably take about a year and a half to get everything in, just based on my development so far, which has been about a year and a half. Yeah, a year and a half, I think, about maybe a year and a quarter to get the prototype and the overworld together. But the next steps are what are going to be very exciting. They're the most important, and I'm going to have to do a lot of things very carefully, and I'm prepared to do that. So I'm excited, and I'm going to end this very, very, very long video now that has discussed the overworld development. Alright.